right, welcome everybody. This is our third day for studying for the AI Associate Certification. We did get news today that it will be retired in a year in February 2026. But since we have a little bit of time to take it and it's free, I would still encourage you to take it because it's really good information to have, and you can also add to your credentials the year you have for Salesforce. So let's get started. Today we are going to be talking about ethical considerations for AI. If we have time, we will do a quiz. We're probably going to not have time, so I will post the quiz and then you can use it as your study quiz for preparing for the certification. As a reminder, I have been studying along with you guys. I am not an official trainer. This is not official training documentation. It's information that I've gathered from the trail mix and information I'm sharing with you. Any questions or comments you have, feel free to go off mute anytime you want and ask your questions, challenge each other, and share any experiences you might have had in the past. So let's talk about what are the trusted principles when it comes to AI. And this is not just for Salesforce, but a lot of this content, keep in mind that it's very Salesforce centric. But with AI, we want to be responsible with what we're doing with it, right? We want to make sure that we're taking care of our data, making sure that we're not using it against people and we're using it to help people, not to affect their human rights or anything along those lines. Make sure you understand that because your agent needs to have a lot of information, you need to make sure that you're keeping your data secure. You want to make sure that you're accountable, which means that you're going to always be looking at what you're building with AI, that you're going to be looking at monitoring it, measuring it, seeing if there's anything that's going wrong with it, fixing it, and improving it. A lot of regulations are coming about because of all the AI changes that are coming so fast, and make sure you're adhering to both existing regulations now, things like GDPR and the California Privacy and Consumer Acts. And a lot of other states also have their own acts they want you to follow when it comes to privacy and how you use information you gather from customers. Be transparent. And this is also often a regulation where you want to let people know they're interacting with AI. I was on a call earlier today where we were testing different voices for a voice bot, and one of them sounded very robotic and the other one was better, but it still sounded like a machine. And we had a great discussion about, we want the customer to know that it's not human. We don't want it to be stoic and like an old robot, but we still want to make sure we're letting them know this is your AI assistant, how can I help you, and not fake like they're a human. So be very transparent. Also communicate how you're using your AI so that you know what it's capable of doing and what it's not. You want to make sure you're empowering both your company and customers, right? You want to make sure your customers have the best tools to reach you, but also that what you're doing with your AI is deferring costs somewhere else. Often AI is very expensive. And so you want to make sure that you're using it to benefit just the customer and make sure that overall it's going to be improving growth and employment opportunities for other people. You should not be looking at AI as I'm using this AI to replace this person. That would not be following your principles and not keeping humans safe and those kind of things, right? So make sure you're always keeping into consideration, how is this going to affect other people? Is this good for our culture and society? Or is this something that I really should not be doing? Of course, be inclusive. Make sure that you're respecting values from others and that you're not negatively affecting them. And we're going to talk about that today, about how certain attributes can either be safe to use and ethical, but the exact same attribute, if you use it differently, now is no longer ethical because you're using it to either exclude or include certain groups, and that is not being inclusive, and it's also not ethical. So you guys have any questions or comments about AI principles?
Very universal. And Marlene, is it the practice to now call it a virtual assistant? I've seen different things, and like you told you the other day, I'm in the dental industry, and in the dental industry, it's being used actually for web pages to kind of start talking to the patient when they're trying to either learn more about procedures or what offerings the office is offering. And they sound really real. I heard one the other day that I thought I was talking to a human. It sounded that good.
I think it's interesting because a virtual assistant does not mean it's AI. And so if you're saying I'm a virtual assistant, it doesn't tell you that you're using generative products and those kind of things. The call that we had earlier has to do with the call center. And two of the features with the robotic voice I was talking about are not AI driven. The other two are AI driven, and they actually generate their own text versus just reading prompts that have been pre programmed. And so I think being transparent, you would want to say whether your the way that you're helping a customer has AI or not, because that is a completely different layer than just we've built some really fancy programming that will help you do things easier. But there is no standard to your question, Gil. I think people just being transparent is, and of course, work with your legal team and those kind of things. But yeah,
Right. It depends on the size of the corporation and a lot of other considerations.
exactly. So, what does it mean when you are responsible with, and sorry about the wrapping, just the way the image took, when you're being responsible with generative AI and what are the potential harms, right? Of course, you want to make sure you're accurate. You want to make sure that when you're pulling data back, it's for that specific customer and not a general customer. We're going to go down the left hand side first. For safety, you want to make sure that you're mitigating biases and also toxicity. You want to make sure that you're if you're using generative AI, it's not telling people to harm themselves, right? It's not showing incorrect information. It's not hallucinating. Hallucinating is extremely common. You want to make sure that you're aware of that. Obviously, protect PII. I think one of the things that Salesforce does really well is they have the trust layer, and so before it goes to the model, it will strip out what it thinks is PII, send it, and then repopulate it. What is key there is I said what it thinks is PII. It's pretty good at detecting what it thinks is PII, but it doesn't always know what PII is, right? So you still want to make sure that even if you accidentally send data to a large language model, that the large language model is not keeping it and using it. When you use ChatGPT every day, are you aware how your information is being used? Right. So just be aware of that toxicity and how your data is being protected. We've talked about being honest with the AI, be transparent to make sure people understand what you're doing with it. Make sure that you're protecting the data and how it moves across the different systems, and also be clear when you've generated content with AI. I would say about half of the presentation you're seeing today, by the way, I generated with AI. I read the modules, I took the module quiz, I did a little prompt on ChatGPT and said, ChatGPT, I want you to help me with these study notes. I want you to have the key points, and I want you to give me study questions that both test my knowledge and give me the right answers along the way. So a lot of what we're looking at today is generated by AI. This slide is not, but some of the other ones you'll see in a little bit are. I'm not having AI create everything for me because if I do that, I don't learn. And so I chose purposely not to say, just give me a pretty presentation and then present to you because it would not have worked for me to learn it for the certification. But again, be honest about how and when you're using AI. So if you're using it for your emails at work, you may want to say AI, maybe not AI produced, but AI supported, or something people. I don't even know what the tag is. Right, going back to Gil's question, I don't know what the standard is. Make sure that you are making yourself faster. Right, we're not looking to replace humans. We're looking to make people being more enabled at what they're able to do now. So instead of writing boring 100 emails a day, they can get different ideas, they can tweak, they can refine, and then send it. So each email doesn't take 10 minutes, it takes 3 minutes. And you can do better and be able to achieve your goal faster, whether that's customer service or sales. Again, going back to, I'm sure everybody's thinking it's going to take my job. And we definitely have seen technology take jobs from people through hundreds of years, right? So this is not something new. So this talks to being fair to labor practices, but we'll see how that goes about. Salesforce is selling Agentforce really hard. It will replace some roles. It's just that you needed 10 people to do this task before, now you need 8. Are you going to keep those 2 people and give them a different role so that you have more capacity to do more things? Or are you going to lay them off? I'm sure you guys have seen tons of layoffs. Has been going on for the past 2 years in the tech world. So layoffs are real, and we'll see what happens with more AI that's coming our way. That's the other reason I think these groups are great for us to study, and that's why I would get the certification. It's a credential that you will have that will show how you're keeping up with the times, right? And it's tangible. Even though it's going to get retired, it's something you can still say, I am keeping up with it. I understand what it is. It helps me be faster and smarter on my everyday tasks. And you can make sure you're saying, and I'm making sure I'm not sending data to an AI tool that's improper. I didn't get to read the article because it was in Apple Plus, but somebody, and again, I didn't get the details, but somebody at Disney installed an AI tool on their machine and it caused a huge data leak and they lost their job and it caused a whole bunch of issues. I don't know any more details than what I just shared with you because it was just from the headline. But I'm assuming the AI program was not approved. I'm assuming they uploaded confidential information, whether it was like company information or customer data. But either way, make sure you're aware how you're using AI. I use it on my personal computer. I don't have any customer data there. I don't worry about those kind of things, right? I only use approved tools at work. So make sure you're doing that.
And Marlene, I guess the whole funny thing about this, and again, you work at a huge corporation, so you don't know exactly where I'm coming from. It's people tend to do things on their own initiative, right, with the right intention. I'm not judging their intention, but
No.
if you work for a company and the company has IT rules, and one of the number one rules is don't put nothing on the computer that is not vetted by the company, then why are you doing it? you know, like and it sounds simple, but that's how things get started, and that's how things go out of control when people use this kind of tools. And again, I'm not saying that it's not. I tell my peers all the time, I'm not a big chat GPT for what I do every day. I don't use it. I actually use Google Gemini because I find it simple, and Chrome is an approved tool, and I don't use it for nothing confidential. I just use it to generate an idea or to refine something that I wrote and I want to get some feedback on verbiage or whatever. But you got to be cognizant of the company rules. And then you also mentioned, most of us have two computers. Come on, be smart about it. Like I sometimes don't understand why people risk it that way.
Yeah, it can definitely have severe consequences, and it did for that individual. So hopefully, everything turns out okay for them in the company, right? Because I don't know what they lost from a data perspective. So we'll see what that happened. And of course, when you're looking at models, make sure you understand the resources that you're consuming when you're building something new in AI. Going back to your point, Gail, right? Depending on your size company, you're probably just using somebody else's model. For my company, we're building our own models, and so how much labor does that take? How much CPU are we using? We're on AWS. How much is that going to cost us to keep running? So there's things you want to make sure that you're making sure that you're not consuming too many resources. So what can happen if you don't follow these guidelines, right? We talked about harmful. You can have harmful recommendations. So maybe the AI read your knowledge article wrong, and maybe you have two articles that counter each other. The AI combine something on their own and they start to hallucinate. It's going to give inaccurate recommendations that can maybe cause damage. Maybe you're going to ask my AI, can I take the car I rented to another country? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. We want to make sure that AI knows when the right answer needs to be given, right? For yes, you can drive to Mexico, but if you are in Europe or Eastern Europe, no, you can't drive to Ukraine. That's a country that's in war, and your contract does not allow you to take this car into a war zone. So again, it's very specific to the scenario that you're asking about. Make sure that when you're looking at how your data and your model is being biased, that you're making sure that you know how it's being used for ad targeting. And we'll talk about this a little more later on. But don't assume that the AI is going to do the right thing. It's just going to follow a pattern that was in your data, and it could make something bigger than it was originally. You did a small task to test something, and they actually, oh, that worked great. Let me do this 10 more times. And now it's not doing the right thing for you. You also want to make sure that your brand is not affected. Just to make sure that you're following your brand voice, and it's not going to upset somebody that gets the information that the AI sent. Of course, make sure you're looking at copyright. We talked about this last time, right? How do you know if it's really new that it's being generated? Because it's taking a pattern of what's everything out there. These slides are going to be uploaded to Google. If they do another scrape of what's available online, they're going to get a copy of these slides. I created these slides from content on Trailhead. Isn't my content? No. How is the next time that OpenAI goes through all this content. How's it going to take it? I don't know. I have no idea how they're doing copyrights. But you want to make sure they're looking into intellectual property and that you're not taking advantage of those. That way, you know that things are being used properly. We talked about job displacement, right? You want to make sure that that you're helping the humans are being helped by AI and not being harmed by it. And we do want to make sure that we have people that are have a job that has many facets to it. So if the only thing they're doing can now be done by a machine, what's going to happen to the job? You know, how do we make sure we take care of the person, even though the role is no longer needed? And of course, be careful about sending misinformation. It's very easy to send information from AI that might look a little bit different and not be what really is true. All right, let's keep going because we have lots. Types of bias. I thought this was really interesting. This is a complete copyright. It's not copyright infringement because it's publicly available on the web. And I'm letting you know that it's from Focus on Force, and I'm giving you the link, right? They had this really great diagram that talks about what kinds of biases you need to consider. So do you have confirmation bias because you did a test on a very small group and it said, yes, everybody is of this particular age, race, whatever that is? Well, now your data confirms what you had because you had a small test. Are you doing interaction bias because there's dependency on some variable or another? Can you imagine all of the things that are bought on Prime Day on Amazon? A lot of that is driven by their sales that day. And I love when they say, 60% of the list price. And yesterday the list price was cheaper, right? Like I always look at that. It annoys me a little bit. And you want to make sure if you have an algorithm that's running on your AI that you're looking for any unfair decisions. Here's an example, maybe you're using zip code to make decisions about creditworthiness. That would be a bias and that would be unethical because you're assuming that everybody that lives in a particular zip code is either has great economic potential or poor. So be careful with that. Automation bias. This is over reliance on automating compromises judgment. So that way, the fact that it can be automated doesn't mean that you need to do it. Maybe it does need a personal touch. Somebody has suggested that they wanted to generate reviews for their product and send them to the customer via email. So they're going to use Gen AI to send reviews and say, post this for us on the whatever platform it was. I don't know if it was Facebook or Yelp or whatever it was. Well, you're automating reviews, but then those are really not real reviews because you're seeding it to the customer. I thought that was a little nebulous whether it was ethical or not. The customer still has to take an action, but I still don't think that. To me, it felt unethical. Societal bias, of course, make sure that your algorithms are not amplifying systematic social disparities, that you're again trying to reinforce inclusion and equality and not taking it the other way. Survival or survivorship bias is going to be when you limit the focus on successes only and you're not looking at what happened on failures because failures are also very valid data. And if you're looking at the success, it's going to skew one way or the other. Association bias means that if you're assuming correlations, assume correlations would lead to prejudice. And so going back to maybe people that live in the same household don't have the same credit score. And so, but you say, no, that household has a credit score of 500, so I'm going to assume everybody in the household has the same. That would be an association bias. Any questions or comments about types of biases? All right, let's keep going. We're going to talk about the ethical AI maturity model. And this has 4 stages to it. And so when you start, you're going to start most likely in an early stage, which is called ad hoc. And ad hoc is, should we do this? Should we not do this? It's informal advocacy. You might have a small group that says, I want to try this pilot. Let me go do this. And they do it. From those results, they're going to review it and they're going to do a risk assessment. But they're still doing this as a one-off time. We did this last year. We did multiple AI pilots and we're trying to figure out what worked and what didn't. When you move forward into organized and repeatable phase of the model, now you most likely had results that you presented from your ad hoc pilots and tests. Now you have executive buy-in. So your executives say, yes, this is a good thing to be doing. They agree on your ethical principles and what it is that you're going to be doing. they have a team that has diverse experts. It's not just the person that built the model that's giving you the information. It really is a whole team that says, yes, this makes sense. You have customer service, you have sales, just to get the views from the different groups. You have education on what programs are going on and how the models are built and how they're used. And you're also doing an ethics review to make sure that people understand what your programs are and how you're staying within your principles. And that way you make sure, again, you review your AI all the time to make sure that you're staying within the guardrails that you set. When you move forward to the third stage of the model maturity, now you have managed and sustained. And so now you have an ethical development process. So that way you are no longer have 4 or 5 teams that are doing their own thing and kind of figuring out on their own, but you're actually streamlined how that gets done and you have consistency. You're going to either build or buy a bias assessment because what you've been doing so far might have inadvertently have a bias in it. You just didn't realize it was in your data. Now you're not just looking at the ethic review of your progress, but you're also making sure that we didn't accidentally build a bias into the process. You have metrics to track progress, and this is going to be the progress of how you're communicating with people, how often the AI is right, how often it's wrong, and you're really looking at multiple metrics, not just your sales, because it's more than sales. You want to make sure that you're continuing to assess and progress your model. You're going to be doing regular audits to make sure that now you're on track with your ethics, your bias, and then your metrics are on track. So you're building on with each layer. Once you reach the fourth level of maturity, now you're optimized and innovative. This is when you have ethical design practices, which means that from start to finish, you're looking at your AI process and how it's built in an ethical way, implemented, and deployed. You're also going to look for poor ethics audits, not just am I doing the right thing, but also am I making sure I'm not doing the wrong thing? Because it's a little bit different to look at it from that perspective. These four models are really important, and you're going to want to make sure that your company stays on track for it. Any questions or comments? All right, let's go on. So continuing to look at the AI model review, and this is where you're going to want to know these because these are questions you're going to get on your certification because they want to make sure you understand, given a scenario, what ethical model is the company in and how that's going to affect maybe some of your choices, whether you want to proceed with the scenario or you want to tweak the scenario to make sure that you are at least in the ad hoc model and you're not doing something that's wrong. So for ad hoc, this is when AI efforts are informal and they're driven by individual advocates. So that's where you have different teams trying different things to figure out what works best. There is not a formal process or dedicated resources. It just gets some kind of on the side. This is when it's a good model when you're starting out because it's how you get people to understand the capabilities of AI and you raise awareness about the importance of AI ethics, right? So it's not just I'll do anything and everything, but you're looking to make sure people understand what you're doing. You're also looking to build initial support and understanding within the organization. And so again, that's the capabilities of it, that's the costs of it, and also how you can apply it. When you are in the second level for organized and repeatable, it's a little more formal and you have formal teams that are dedicated to AI ethics. The development and structure process have allocation of resources. So that way you know that this is not something that I have to do on my extra 10 hours a week that I work at work. It's something that I can actually put and it's part of my standard job. The focus here is that you're establishing a clear strategic vision for ethical AI. So it's not just something that might get done, it's something that you know you're doing and you have tactics for it. You're creating repeatable practices to address ethical considerations systematically. And again, this is basically building the habit, building the process, and making sure you're following the same patterns across multiple projects. In the managed and sustainable, the characteristics are that you have implementation of metrics and evaluation methods to assess ethical AI practices. You're ensuring the long-term viability and integration of ethical considerations into AI development. And again, this is not just everybody building out from their own, but there's a review that goes and says, yes, this used the right type of data, this the way that we're applying our algorithm is not using an unethical attribute, and we're not including or excluding certain segments of the population unfairly. The focus of this particular stage is you're embedding ethical AI into the organization's culture and operations. And so, again, this is definitely when you get something into the culture, it's huge. I don't know about you guys, but years and years ago, I had implemented Net Promoter Score in my company. And we were working with the sales team because at that time, it wasn't important for Net Promoter Score to come about. But then when the sales leader said, Net Promoter Score will now affect your bonus. If your Net Promoter Score is below this, you're going to lose 10% of your bonus. Suddenly, it got a lot more important. And that was really putting it into the culture of the organization and operations because now you're affecting people's pay. Now and it got, guess what? Our Net Promoter Score went up. They made sure to do the right things to get that done. What I think is funny is when people will tell you, please give me a 10, because we always like to get 10s. Oh, I never like that. I don't think that's like, it's great to tell me, please give me, a fair rating, but give me 10s. I'm like, come on. This is going to continue monitoring and improvement of AI systems and to make sure you're upholding your ethical standards. The highest level is optimized and innovative. The characteristics here are going to be your ethical AI practices are fully integrated and drive innovation. You're proactive about identification and mitigation of any potential issues. The focus is going to be that you're leveraging ethical AI as a competitive advantage. You're leading industry standards and contributing to broader societal benefits, right? And so this is when we get to see Salesforce and somebody be up on stage because they're doing an awesome job. Um, the byproduct of this should be getting better company performance. I know one of the things that Salesforce says is that AI is not for profitability, but it is, right? We do these things because we want to make more money, because I want to get paid more, because I want to raise, and I want to go buy something fun. But we also want to make sure that we're not harming people when we're doing it. So, any questions about the models? Any comments that you want to add?
I'm just curious if anyone is in a well, other than ad hoc. I think you said, Marlene, that you're working on your own LLM, your own model. Is anyone else in a more structured process right now? No.
I don't think so. And everybody that I talk to is either they're somewhere between ad hoc and organizational repeatable, right? Because this is dedicated teams dedicated to AI ethics. So this is not dedicated teams to building AI. This is
Right.
dedicated teams to making sure that what you're doing is ethical. And
And David, I'll just give you my example. In my industry, dental, and the company that I work for, we actually are partnering with other companies that already have an AI product,
Mm-hmm.
and they already have all these in place. So one of the ones that we are working with, they already are on their third version of their product, and is a FDA cleared product. So for that industry is really important. So uh, all I'm saying is I think that the level of maturity will vary based on the industry, the type of product, the specific application, the use case. And I know it's kind of like generic, but I'm just giving you a real example. Like this product
Yeah.
we have is a third generation FDA cleared, and it's a phenomenal product. And I really think it's a great use of AI, and yet still, we're still going through the iterations and all this, and then the feedback from the actual clinical community, because it's a product that is applied for clinical diagnosis and for aiding dentists into identifying possible lesions. So that kind of interaction between the clinical team and the technical team keeps driving all this. And I'm sure that in the background, everything that is happening here went through, but now they are in the optimized and innovative because now they already been doing it for so long that the product is kind of mature, again, in an industry that is kind of new. So I just wanted to give you that example because it's the only one I know intimately.
I almost feel like a medical product or something that has to do with the medical industry would have to be by definition more mature and more ethically sound, because it's like, my exposure has been it's just the Wild West. People, the new a new quads on it, this, that, the other thing. People are just
mhm.
trying whatever, and paying with their own credit cards because it's like $20 a month or whatever it is. There's just a lot
Yeah,
of Ew, new toys.
And AI in the healthcare industry has been used for for the last 15 years. I think that even between medical and dental is a little bit behind medical, but you are now seeing that maturity level, and I think that again, I that's why I love this conversation, because I also can see it from a user on the world that I live on a regular basis. So
Yeah. So let's go to our next topic, which is ethical data use in personalization, right? So how are you using the data in your campaigns, especially when you do AI? It just everything gets scaled up very quickly. So let's look at ethical use principles and best practices in personalization. And these are definitely best practices. So you want to make sure that your customers do you have a perceived risk of personalization, right? A few, like a year last year, my husband went to go buy some shoes. We were in the brick and mortar store. He bought one pair of shoes, and he looked at another one, but he didn't buy them. And they were very, very different styles. He did not buy them. We paid with our credit card, and then we came home. One day later, my husband had an ad for the second pair of shoes he looked at in the store. That creeped us out. It's like, how do you know which pair of shoes we looked at? Completely different styles, not related to them, to the other one at all, different colors, different everything. And it was there. And I don't generally know how they did it. Maybe it was stroke of luck that they showed the same shoe, but it seemed pretty targeted and kind of weird. But you want to make sure that when you have personalization, right, that you're looking, obviously, always security breaches are a bad thing. Misusing data is a bad thing. And I don't even know how, by the way, the ad that we saw was on Google. So not only did you let out my information about what shoes I bought, what store I was at, with what credit card, but now you gave it to Google that I'm interested in shopper, right? Like that was just weird. And you want to have this is great, anticipated data collection and sharing. I didn't know they were doing that. And obviously they did it. Um, I felt it was invasive and it was unwanted, and you just want to make sure that you're not doing that to your customers. And obviously, the last one for bias, when we're buying solely on demographic data, you don't want to assume anything about your household because you had demographic data. My husband is funny. He does not speak Spanish. Gil, I'm sure you think that's funny because I've been married for so long. But we'll get a ton of commercials in Spanish. And he goes, I don't know how to tell them that I don't speak Spanish. And it's just funny. But they're assuming that we're a Spanish household because I am Latin, which I am, but only half of the household understands Spanish. So they're missing out on the other half, right? So that would be a bias relying on demographic data. And that's just the risk of over personalization. You want
that
to
one is happening a lot with a lot of different tools. I see that a lot in all kinds of spaces. So yes, I hear you.
no, right? You really want to be building trust through transparency and consent. You want to make sure that you have clear communication data usage policies. You know, how is your data being collected? How is it being used? You want to obtain explicit customer consent. In some places, you're required to do that legally. In most, you are not. I think eventually you will, but we're not there yet. And you want to provide options for customers to manage their data preferences, right? How do I turn off that shoe ad from the store that I went to yesterday? Because I don't want you to be using my credit card transactions to market to me. Again, I did not like that at all. Neither did my husband. And you want to prioritize behavior-based intent over demographics. So again, we are not a completely Spanish household, and it wouldn't make sense to always send us Spanish ads or commercials. You want to focus on individual behaviors and engagement for personalization. So if somebody adds something to your cart and they don't close their session, it's pretty common to send an abandoned cart email. People have come to understand that you put something in the cart and maybe you get a coupon later. Sometimes I do it on purpose because I want a coupon. Lowe's and Home Depot for a while, if you would put something in your cart and you would shop for it and you come back, they would give you a 10% off coupon. They haven't done that for a while. I think they caught on, but you can do that. However, if you're watching somebody's web history, they're not adding anything to their cart, but they're just browsing products, and you start to send communications or personalizations based on that, I think for me, that's gone over the line. I didn't show intent. It just happened to be on my screen, and now you're making decisions on that. And again, don't make assumptions based on demographic attributes because that one's going to come back and bite you. And so if you have different generations living in the same household, you shouldn't assume that you should be sending everything to one age group or another based on those demographics. And so you want to be able to balance the cross-channel messaging, because again, my example about brick and mortar and web is perfect, but you want to make sure that the consumer's expectations are met. So I want to have personalized ads. I just don't want you to cross line. You want to make sure that they're timely and relevant, because otherwise it just doesn't matter. And again, risks of behavioral messaging. Maybe I was buying a gift for my husband and now you're showing it on ads, so now it's not a surprise. So you want to make sure that that perceived invasiveness, if you overuse it, it's going to have people not like it, clear the cookies, stop using your product or your website, and then that has negative consequences. And you can, somebody, I forget who it was, but somebody kept sending me too many emails. I didn't want to completely stop them, but I was able to go in there and say, no, I don't want daily emails or 3 times a day. I want one a week, one a month, right? So that was nice. But they increased the trust because I was able to select that versus continuing to send me too many messages.
Merlin, do you think that this is a consequence of a lot of these behaviors being driven by not AI, but other automation that not necessarily is smart enough?
I do, but then this data gets fed into the AI models, and now you have AI repeat the same patterns. And that's where you want to be careful with what the data
And
you
bring
give
that
AI.
bias because you're bringing the bias that was established prior. Got it.
Exactly.
Perfect. Makes sense. Okay, got it.
Yep. Yep. So ethical recommendations, right? And we've talked about this. You want to collect and respect the preferences of the customer. You want to make sure you're honoring the data sharing choices that you give them the option to do, right? Don't ask them what you want me to do and then ignore it, because that would be the exact opposite. And you want to make sure people are able to opt in and opt out. Message frequency, I shared this example of way too many emails in one day. Now I'm happy with once a week. You want to, if I get 4 emails from everybody every day, I just get overwhelmed. And so I would rather get timely messages and not 3 a day, because that's your calendar sequence right now. You do want to target your audience carefully. This is where targeting can have a bias, and you want to be careful with that. You want to base your messaging on expressed interests, not on their demographics, because once again, demographics makes too many assumptions about somebody based on age, gender, background. It's just, you want to be careful with that. And so if I've expressed an interest on one particular cruise line versus another, do that. Don't assume that I want all cruises of a particular type because I'm Latin. Behavioral triggers, make sure that to use customer actions to inform relevant and timely communications, right? It's good to tell them you're receiving this email because you've expressed interest in XYZ. You're being transparent. The customer knows what they did, and they also know what they can change. I can go uncheck a box, say, don't send me those messages anymore because I'm not interested in that topic anymore. So again, these are all just best practices. Do you guys have any examples of when you had something from a marketing perspective that just didn't feel right, or maybe the opposite? It was great because they had sent you something that was so timely. Gail's laughing.
I laugh because that's what I do for a living. I call people that express interest on some marketing campaign, and half of the time I hate to assume because again, the system is not good enough and it's not perfect, and we use the phrase "play coy," right? You try to not give too much into it. Oh, somebody from the office might have clicked on an advertisement. I'm just confirming that you got interested in it, right? You try to phrase it in a way that you're being, cognizant and responsible and ethical, and not being overly salesperson because nobody wants to be sold. Everybody wants to buy. Nobody wants to be pushed something down their throat. They want to make that buying informed decision. But it's a thin line, and it starts with communication first, trust second, and then how quickly can you establish trust with proper communication? That's the key. And as a salesperson on the phone all day, every day, it's hard.
I bet. I bet. Makes sense. Thank you, Gil. Our next topic is ethics by design. And so, ethics by design, and these are the principles that Salesforce has, but they're pretty universal, like we had some other ones before, right? We want to make sure when we're looking at ethics, we're looking at human rights, privacy, safety, honesty, and inclusion. And we talked about these earlier on. that what's really important here is you're being intentional about these things, that you're not, it's not a byproduct. Oh, like, oh, I got lucky, I was ethical. No, you want to make sure that you're doing it on purpose, that you're integrating the ethical and human principle throughout the whole life cycle of developing technology, from the idea to the development to the actual deployment. And so, human rights, are you upholding and respecting inherent rights of all individuals? Again, not, you're being inclusive and not leaving people out. You're making sure that you're prioritizing protection of the data and of the people's information, because you don't want to, this is both a business benefit and a business risk if you don't do it right. You want this to be ethical, but you also want to make sure you're protecting the data. Make sure your systems are designed in a way to not harm others. I don't know if you guys heard or not, but I think last year there was a teenager who was talking to a AI, Gen AI. I don't even know which one it was, but basically, unfortunately, the Gen AI encouraged him to hurt himself, and he actually committed suicide. So it can be horrendous when you don't look at things like safety. And the person sued, and I don't know what happened, but it can really go completely wrong. When we were doing our pilots for testing, I remember the program manager asking the AI model, can I take this car to Mexico and can I kill somebody with it? Because they were trying to trigger the AI to give you bad information, and it had the right guardrail, so it didn't do that. So you want to make sure you're looking at safety. Again, honest, be transparent, be truthful, make sure you're letting people know how and what you're using their information and that they're working with AI, and be inclusive. So ethics by design, when you're looking at it and how you would be able to do it, is you want to have what are called consequence scanning workshops. And so these are structured sessions where the teams can anticipate potential impacts. You talk about what could go wrong when you're building new technology. That way you can say, how do we mitigate that? What are we looking to be positive about it, but also what happens with unintended consequences? And this is true of any technology, right? This is not just AI. This is just something you're doing when you're building new features to your system. You want to get cross-functional collaboration, because diverse teams are going to give you different views and they'll bring up something that you weren't aware of. When my product owner was testing the bot for harming others, I wasn't aware of that issue that had happened to the teenager. And once I found out, I'm like, oh, now I understand what he's testing. He wants to make sure we're not going to be inadvertently harming others and our AI does not become toxic. So again, it just helps it be a more well-rounded aspect to the project. There is an Office of Ethical and Humane Use of Technology, and this is something that Salesforce has, right? The mission is to provide leadership and guidance on complex ethical issues arising from intersection of human potential and emerging technology. So basically, how can we use the technology for good, and what can we do when it goes bad, and how can you make sure you don't have it go bad, right? So the key responsibilities are, there's a policy development where it's going to craft and enforce policies that ensure ethical technology use. You have employee empowerment. So Salesforce employees have tools and frameworks that they can make sure what they're doing is ethical on their daily work. They have product accessibility and inclusion design. So it ensures the products are accessible to people with disabilities and promoting equality and innovation. This is something that's been around for a long time, right? ADA assistance and compliance. Don't just use red and green for your symbols because people can be colorblind. That's a really basic example. But what if somebody has dyslexia and you have too much content on the slide? Like, I know this slide is a little busy. How are you making sure that people understand those things? I like to use different icons that are completely unique, because that helps reinforce the idea behind it, right? People learn in different ways. And also there's ethical differentiators in Salesforce products. So that's where Salesforce has things like the trust layer. And they have built guardrails around the AI, in part because their product is better and that way you want to buy it, but also because it provides more safety around the features themselves. They're implementing factors that have predictive factors, sensitivity fields, model metrics. That way they're being transparent about how it's being used. If you've been playing with Agentforce, when you build an agent and you go test it, in the middle of the workspace, it goes through and it shows you how it came about everything, what data it's using, what steps it took. So you really can see what it's doing, and it's not a black box. So that's part of having the trusted features. This is very specific to Salesforce. I don't know how much of it is in the certification, but just be aware of it. So now let's talk about a couple of things you need to be aware of when it comes to privacy. So do you guys know what GDPR is?
Yes.
Yeah. And so for the longest time, it was not very well known, but I think it's become better known. So this is General Data Protection Regulation, and we think of it as being a European thing, and it is. So this is a EU privacy law, and it's not just for people. It applies to organizations that handle personal data for European citizens. So Hertz is a U.S. company, but we handle plenty of data for UE, and we follow GDPR. GDPR gives the citizens of the EU very specific rights, and it increases accountability to the business of what you need to do with the data. This is one that the fines are pretty high if you don't follow it. So, requirements for business, you need to obtain clear consent before processing data. And so you can't just take somebody's data and go do what you want with it, like they did with my credit card. In Europe, they would not have done that. You need to have a data protection officer. That is a role that is required to be in your company, and it can be required for large scale data processing. Your business must report a data breach within 72 hours. You cannot wait. It has to be reported. You just know you had a data breach. You don't have details yet. That's fine. You're going to let them know that it happened. Then you're going to get more details, and then you can update the notification, but you have to release it as soon as possible. And you have to conduct assessments to make sure you evaluate where your company is now. And that's called a data protection impact assessment. And you need to do it on a regular basis. Key principles of GDPR. It's of course it's a law, and so it's lawful, it's fair, and it goes through transparency. Data must be collected, processed in a legal, fair, and clear manner. So you're not illegally obtaining information and using it for things that you did not notify the customer for. The data must be collected for a specific purpose. You can't just go to a phone book and start collecting data and saying, I'm just going to call everybody. And Gil can't go call everybody in UK. Actually, UK is not EU anymore. But anyway, you can't go call somebody in France because you do not have permission to do that. You should only have the data you need. You should not have all the data in the world about the person because you don't need it. That will also limit how much data you might put at risk if there's a breach. So only necessary data should be collected and processed. Of course, it must be accurate. So if the person moved, your records should be updated to the new person's information and not keep the old data in different places. A couple of weeks ago, my husband got diagnosed with a horrible disease, and he saw it in his medical notes. And it was on the notes. Nobody had told him anything. And so the next time he went to the doctor, he said, "What is this?" Because he wasn't worried because they had never talked to him about it. Go, "Oh, we checked the wrong box." And so they had to go fix it. And so you want to make sure you're being accurate with the data because it matters. The problem, though, is that office did it. We don't know where else it propagated to. So my husband goes, well, great, now I'm going to start getting these flyers for this horrible disease that I don't have. And so just be careful with how accurate things are because there are really consequences. Only keep data as long as you need it. Most companies have retention rules and make sure that you're keeping it for that time frame. There is no need to keep something for 20, 100 years. Follow your company standards and make sure that that is transparent as well. You must protect personal data. You do not want to have, and it's funny because we've all heard news about like they found a dumpster full of tax forms because some accountant had just dumped everything and not worried about shredding or recycling, or everybody's information was on there. But you, in EU, that would give you some pretty large fines. You must protect personal data. You must also demonstrate that you are implementing protection policies and that you're aware of the program and you're not just doing it ad hoc. There's a lot of rights for you as a consumer under GDPR. So you need, and we get these on a daily basis. You are able to request what data somebody has on you and how long they've had it and what they're planning to do with it. So that's the right to access. Individuals are able to, of course, fix inaccurate data. You have the right to be forgotten. And so this is not, I can't rent a car from Hertz, be a French citizen and say, you must forget me. They have to forget me from every system they have to forget me from except transactions because legally you need to be able to say, well, Marlene rented this car on this date and she was in an accident. That has a record that needs to be kept, right? But the right to be forgotten will impact a whole bunch of other things when it comes to AI models. when it comes to marketing data and all those things. So when you're building a model, make sure you understand what attributes are you putting about a person in a model. It should not be specific people, because then how are you going to maintain things like GDPR? But if you're talking about marketing databases, you do need to make sure that your main system is Salesforce, great, and then you have a copy of that person in your data warehouse. Well, right to be forgotten means that you have to erase me from Salesforce and your data warehouse, not just one system. People can limit how their data is used, which is, I think, is great. Obviously, this does not apply to the US, but that's what they have in Europe. You have the right to be able to transfer data between services. You have the right to object. So if individuals refuse the processing of data, how it's being done. And then you have the rights to automated decision making. And so I think this is interesting. People can demand human intervention in AI-driven decisions. So if the AI said, yes, you're great for this and you don't agree, you can have them follow up and change it. So in the EU, they've already have changes to GDPR that has to do with AI. California also has a couple of laws that we're going to look at. One of them is CCPA and CPRA, and this is specific to California. So California Consumer Privacy Act is CCPA. It was enabled in 2018, and it applies to California residents. And so if you deal with California customers, this would apply to you as well as a company. And they basically have an act that gives them rights over how your information is being used by a business. Later on, a couple years later, the California Privacy Rights Act came about, and it amended the original act and it expanded on it. So both still apply, but this one gave them more rights and obligations for the business to follow. Let's look at each one individually. So the California Consumer Privacy Act, very similar to GDPR, but not quite as extensive. You have the right to know what information they have about you. You have the right to be deleted or forgotten, like GDPR. You have the right to opt out. So I don't want you to be selling my information. You have the right to non-discrimination, which makes sense to me, right? That one is technically a federal law, but it's in the California Act for some reason. But consumers have the right to be protected against discrimination for exercising their privacy rights. Business obligations, you have to have privacy notices. I'm sure you guys get them in the mail or your email saying our privacy policy changed, and businesses must inform you when that happens. Data access and deletion. Businesses must provide mechanism for consumers to request that their data be deleted. Otherwise, it has to be something reasonable, right? It can't be a personal request. And you, as a business, you have to have an opt-out mechanism so that the consumer can select to have their information not be sold as part of the relationship with you. The extension to that was the California Privacy Rights Act, and this one added some additional pieces. So they added sensitivity personal information, which introduced a new category of data, which I think was interesting because it includes social security numbers, financial account details, and precise geolocation. Because now that we all carry a phone, you have a GPS locator on you all the time. My husband and I share each other's locations. It's handy. I could tell him when he got to Melbourne yesterday because I'm in Orlando right now. And so that way I know he got there safe, no accidents, no flat tires. But obviously, I'm his wife. I don't want companies to be having that information about him. And of course, you have to grant consumers a right to limit of this use. They have the right to correct. So, of course, you can correct inaccurate information. Companies must disclose how long they keep data for retention periods. None of us are California residents, but if we were, this would apply to us, right? And they've established an California Privacy Protection Agency. This is an agency dedicated to enforcing the privacy laws within California. And they also expand the definition of sharing. And so sharing is personal information for cross-context behavioral advertising, even without monetary exchange, allowing customers to opt out. So again, going back to my Kirk example, you can't market to me. Again, if I was in California, I could have gotten them in trouble. But these are all the California rules that you need to abide by. Other states are coming out with their own rules. So if you are working in this kind of environment, work with your legal team to make sure you understand what laws apply to you and your customers. Questions or any exchanges that you want to share?
The challenge will be that if this becomes the practice, then every state will have their own rules, and then it gets really complicated. Of course, the solution is creating a blanket model that applies to all states, but that's proven a challenge to all companies.
Very true. And so I'm not going to be able to do the quiz with you guys today. What I'm going to do is, um, if you want to take the quiz, I'm going to put it over here right now. I'm going to change it to be self-paced. Audience. And so now you should be able to go to the QR code. The QR code is also on the presentation as the last page for our quiz. It's the same QR code. And as always, thank you so much for participating in your comments. I really appreciate it. My plan is to take the associate exam soon before all this content falls out of my head and start studying for AI specialist. I won't do specialist until probably the third week in March would be my guess right now, just because the March is already in a couple of days, and actually March is tomorrow, and it's been a quite busy first couple of months already. So next week I will be traveling, and then after that I will put together a calendar for a specialist. Any questions or comments before I start recording?
Thank you, Marlene, for doing this. We really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
I hope it helps.